All right. Hi, everyone. We're starting chapter 6. So, emotional and social development when they are babies and toddlers. So, first and foremost, I want to talk about those mirror neurons again because we're going back into emotion. We're going to talk about emotions. So, I talked about it in the last lecture, but I want to make sure that you understand that's a really recent discovery. Not until 1994 did we accidentally discover mirror neurons. And it was from a research study with monkeys. Researchers attached electrodes to individual neurons in a monkey's premotor area, then set up a computer to monitor precisely which neurons fired when the monkey picked up a peanut or grasped a banana. At one point, an experimenter was putting food in a box, and when he looked up at the computer, the monkey's brain cells were firing at the exact location where the motor command neurons were located. But the monkey wasn't eating or moving. He was watching the researcher, and his brain was vicariously mirroring the researcher's actions. Now, take that and apply it to infants. We now know that the mirror neurons, they mirror things like empathy, imitation, synchrony, and even the development of language. They're like neural Wi-Fi. We pick up on another person's movements, emotional state, and intentions through this Wi-Fi. When we're in sync with each other, we tend to stand or sit in similar ways, and our voices can take on the same rhythms. But mirror neurons make us vulnerable to negativity, so that we respond to their anger with fury or dragged down by depression. Trauma invariably involves not being seen and not being mirrored. So when we have an infant who is not being mirrored, not being attended to, not cooing and babbling back and forth, they're not being able to be at optimum health. They're constantly not able to safely mirror, and they're not being mirrored by others, and they're very vulnerable to being hijacked by negative emotions. So I think that's really interesting as we talk more about emotions. Going into the emotions today, um, emotions are brain-based impulses that motivate a person to act in a particular way. So sensory information from the environment comes in, and it comes in through sight and smell and sound and kinesthetic ways. So it converges into the body through the eyes and the ears and the touch, the kinesthetic sense. And they all converge on the thalamus in the brain where it's processed. The thalamus is akin to cooking, to the cook. Everything like alphabet soup kind of goes into the thalamus, right? And then it's processed and it's passed to the amygdala. And the amygdala determines is it an emotional significance? Is it of emotional significance? If the threat is detected in the amygdala, then it sends messages to the hypothalamus to secrete hormones to defend against the threat. The second neural pathway, the high road, runs from the thalamus through the hippocampus and the anterior cingulate to the prefrontal cortex, or the rational brain, for a conscious and refined interpretation. If the interpretation of a threat by amygdala is too intense, or the filtering system from higher areas of the brain are too weak, can't access higher order thinking, as often happens in PTSD, which is the thinking brain, the neocortex, people lose control over their automatic emergency responses, like prolonged startle or aggressive outbursts. One of the things I talk about, and this is, so you think about in the developing brain and emotions and stabilization and being able to get to thinking brain from emotional brain. So you've got emotional and you've got thinking, you've got left and right brain function. And so when we have a stressful event, so we're in prolonged stress, the amygdala is in charge of that, the limbic system basically. And we get stuck in limbic system when we can't access that higher order intelligence thinking, the thinking brain. So the medial prefrontal cortex, to be exact, is where we go up to determine if something is really a threat or not. So the amygdala is designed to keep us safe. So if you're walking along and you see a snake, you're going to jump back because your brain is wired that that's dangerous. So you're going to jump back. And then when you stop and look at it and you realize it is a stick, that's the medial prefrontal cortex. That's the thinking brain. Oh, wait a minute. That is It looks like that. It's not moving. Okay, it's a stick. The crisis is past. I am safe. We can return to stabilization in the brain. My stress hormones can reduce to homeostasis, to balance, and I can move on my merry way. In a traumatized brain, and why this is so important when we're talking about how these systems are created with infants and toddlers, because this is when it starts, um, when everything is a threat, the brain malfunctions and you're not able to get up to medial prefrontal cortex to determine if it's not a threat. So then everything becomes a threat or nothing becomes a threat. So the system malfunctions, and which is why people have a really hard time with their emotions because their brain is malfunctioning. And you can fix that in therapy with CBT, with trauma focused CBT, with EMDR, and a whole host of other theories that have been proven to work. But there's a little bit more information about this that I thought was a little bit more fun and interesting. I actually have a really cool slide on it in another PowerPoint. I actually might pull that up. How about that? I'm going to pause this. So this is the mammalian brain. This is the limbic system that we're referencing, where the amygdala lives. So something of note is that children who have a safe environment, they can excel and explore and be safe. They're able to manage fear of abandonment. They're able to manage all of their emotions more in a healthy way. And if you're not in that kind of environment, you're scared all the time. You're trying to constantly manage your fear of abandonment and just fear in general. Your conscious thought comes later. The limbic area is this keep us safe. It's a primitive part of the brain, and it organizes during the first 6 years of life. So I think that's noteworthy for this lecture because we're starting to talk about that area in lifespan development. Isn't this slide much more exciting and pretty? Give you a brain break. And here's an image of the brain for the mammalian brain and the neocortex. So wanting mainly to focus for this slide on the neocortex. The neocortex is where the logical thought is coming. We're making rational decision making, abstract thought, we're planning, thinking things through, morality. If you would, perhaps that would be like super ego, right? Control of emotion. Empathy is housed there. So you can see the difference. And now you see where they are in the brain. You see the mammalian brain there and the neocortex in the highlighted figures. Here's another image of the brain here. There's limbic and neocortex. You can see the two differences. And here is a slide on mirror neurons, right? We pick up mates like Wi-Fi. That's why self-care is important between sessions. And it's also important for you to understand your clients, what mirror neurons are. And there's some little tips here for how to keep yourself healthy in therapy, running on your own EMDR machine, essential oils, debriefing, laughing, fresh air, coffee, smells will stabilize you and bring you back and ground you. We need to help people be able to safely be mirrored by others, and learn how to resist hijacking. That's our job, and we have to make sure that we're able to do that. And that takes time. So important to know. And here's that alarm system I was talking about just a minute ago. So prolonged trauma complicates our alarm system. Amygdala that we're referencing here on page 146 is like the smoke detector of the brain. It begins the release of hormones and starts the fight or flight process. That's a good thing. We need that in case someone's trying to break in our house or something. There was a snake outside of our house yesterday, and it's a harmless snake, but it's still like, ooh, there's a snake, right? And then I calm down, like it's a king snake. It's not going to kill my children. So then I was able to calm down, and I named it Harvey. So it's very non-threatening to me now, and my smoke detector is not going off because I was able to go up into my medial prefrontal cortex and say, okay, it's just a snake. It's a good snake, not a bad snake, not going to kill anybody. We're going to name it Harvey. So, but if I had ongoing trauma that I had not dealt with, I would maybe not be able to return to homeostasis because I would stay in fight or flight because it couldn't get at me medial prefrontal cortex to calm my brain down. I would totally flip out and I would think, snakes are coming. They're going to kill us. They're going to kill my children. They're going to bite me. There's probably poisonous ones around. I'm going to have anxiety and I'm going to be panicked and I'm going to, who knows what I'm going to do, right? And that's an example of not being able to get my brain to return to homeostasis. In a Rorschach study, basically ambiguous ambiguous stimuli. So there's supposed to be ambiguous stimuli in a Rorschach, but some interesting studies from The Body Keeps the Score that everything is threatening in a Rorschach for someone who has PTSD. And that was just a study done on Vietnam veterans. But you can't determine between reality operating from limbic, not prefrontal. So we're not able to get the prefrontal cortex. We're not able to stop ourselves and think. So we're not able to see it and feel it, think it through, and then take an action. We're just feeling and doing, feeling and doing. And probably, there's my child screaming. Not really sure why. Let me have to pause it a second. Okay. Oh, he's calling for his daddy. I'm going to pause it for a second so you don't have to hear Gray screaming for his dad. Okay, Gray wanted milk, so I'm back. Okay. The watchtower. I was just talking about this a little while ago when I was just talking before we started with this PowerPoint. And the watchtower is the medial prefrontal cortex. So if the amygdala is a smoke detector, then the frontal lobes, specifically the medial prefrontal cortex, is the watchtower. The amygdala doesn't make judgments. Remember, the snake is snake. Oh my gosh, jump back, right? That's the medial prefrontal cortex. It's up to that part of the brain to mediate. That area of the brain is what helps clients not to scream and to judge in court. It's what talks to the right brain to calm the right brain down. However, if you can't control your emotions, then you can't get access to that. You're stuck in your emotion and you are in panic all the time or depressed all the time or angry all the time. Okay, let's go back to our other PowerPoint. The very fun white and gray here. Or maybe that's brown. So emerging emotions. This is the first year of life. The infant starts to have tons of different emotions. And the way that the infant communicates is through crying and movements and gestures and smiles. And basic emotions are rooted in the neural circuitry. So what happens is fear and anger, they cause blood flow to be directed to hands or legs for fight or flight. Happiness inhibits negative feelings. So if you're looking at the brain, you can see that. Sadness produces a decrease in energy and enthusiasm. Surprise involves lifting the eyebrows, increasing visual field to see. Disgust is curling the lip and wrinkling the nose. And it has, disgust is important because it protects us from things that might be not good for us. It's also why infants have a really hard time with peas, jarred peas, something like that, right? It takes about, 20 times for them to start to get used to a taste. We learned that last week. So let's talk about the sequence of emotional development. So newborns come into the world with just two states. They are attraction to things that are pleasing to them, like nursing, and withdrawing from aversive stimuli, like maybe being wet and crying and not liking the way that feels, or being in a poopy diaper or something of that nature. And after that, about 6 months, there are some recognizable emotions such as happiness, joy, anger, fear, surprise. And we've seen those images and studies before. Those are the primary emotions. So those are the primary emotions. And then something happens where self-awareness begins to occur, and then the secondary emotions start. And the secondary emotions have two stages. The first one is self-conscious emotions, which is obviously like embarrassment and things like that, and being jealous. And then a little bit later is a self-evaluative emotion, such as pride, and there's guilt for something that they did when they're about 3 that they shouldn't have done, or shame. So that's kind of the sequence of emotional development in children. And when you reference what I talked about earlier, you can see how things can go terribly awry when infants are not given what they need. Cultural variations. So there's a different framework for emotions for different cultures, right? So, this influences the development. So say for instance, collectivist cultures like China, they don't show a lot of emotion. So their development is a little bit different than ours. And ours is an individualistic culture, and we're taught to discuss emotions. And attribution styles can back this up on how different cultures look at different situations and how they appraise them. So there's a study in your book that talks about Tongans and Germans and how they placed what happened in the scenario on what aspect of the scenario. So important to note that there's a huge culture variation in the appraisal of events that happen related to emotions. And we're back to our theoretical perspectives. We have Freud and we have Erikson. Freud, children have to resolve those personal and emotional crises that arise when their biological drives, like sex and aggression, come in conflict with expectations of society. For Freud, parents have to figure out how much they're going to do for their children or how little they're going to do to make sure their child's basic needs are met. And when you can balance gratifying their need, not over permitting or under permitting, with you will raise well-adjusted children who will then go on to satisfy their adult sexual needs while behaving appropriately as individuals within the fabric of society. Now, Erikson, he talks more about the social influence on the person's emotional development and personality over the lifespan. He definitely factors in the relationships with caregivers and how they're formative in the early years of life. For instance, trust versus mistrust. Freud and Erikson were way ahead of their time in a lot of the aspects of their theory. They didn't understand how the brain worked. We didn't have a SPECT scan to look at the areas of overactivity and inactivity in the brain. But based on what they witnessed and observed, they could theorize these amazing ideas that are true in some regards. There's a lot of truth to these, but now we know from brain research as to why. And so when that trust is not met with that caregiver, a lot of issues happen because they're completely reliant on their caregivers. And when their needs are not met, they begin to mistrust everything. Even when they shouldn't, they do. And then that autonomy versus shame and doubt. When a parent does not allow them to do anything for themselves, does not foster independence, um, that continues into adulthood. So way ahead of their time, these guys. Attachment, right? We just talked about this. So important. We know that you will have issues for your entire life if you have attachment disorders. And we now know that we can do something about it. We can actually reattach the attachment issues. I actually do this all the time in therapy, and it is amazing. I can't even explain how it works. But I even have this attachment protocol where we imagine the ideal mother, ideal father, and we take them through the womb to 4. I know that sounds very weird, but it works. And then we just tap it in slowly. We play a movie of a new rebirthing. And for somehow it helps heal the pre-verbal trauma. It's only one thing that I do, but it is very powerful. New attachment protocol work that I'm doing includes tapping in protectors and helpers, tapping in your inner protective adult self, and also having a circle of support. So I do these 5 different coping mechanisms that give the individual the attachment that they need, and it stabilizes them enough to go back and revisit the trauma. Really cool stuff. It's called attachment focused EMDR. It's something that I've been learning over the past couple of years. Okay, so we know this is important, right? We know if the baby is safe, that they're going to have stay in kind of homeostasis. But if they're not, they're going to have those hormones released, right? And their amygdala is like, danger, danger, danger. No one is helping you. You're wet in this diaper for 2 days. This is not good. Um, so it is very, very important that we give and connect with babies. Okay, models of attachment. I'm sorry, guys. Maybe I think it's better, but then you can't see the whole thing. So I've struggled with this, but I know you have a copy of the PowerPoint. So let's talk about models of attachment. So referencing Freud again, he came up with the term cathexis. It was believed that the attachment happened because of a basic drive for food during the oral stage of psychosexual development. But Bowlby came along and he didn't agree. He thought there was more to it because of the studies he did and watching the immense distress of children when separated from mother in his work. He also looked at Harlow You guys may remember Harry Harlow from Psych or any other classes you may have taken, depending on your major. Ethology. He looked at monkeys and made he formulated theories, hypothesized theories that related to infants. And so you may remember the monkey, like the wire monkey study, and they would separate the baby monkeys from the mom monkey, and the monkey would gravitate toward the comfortable mother, the soft mother versus the hard, like wiry mother with food. They would actually seek out comfort more than food. And that is really important because you also have these tricky attachment issues with people where it looks like everything is fine. Their needs are met, nothing is traumatic. But the problem is, if you become a parent and you don't have you're not attached, you weren't securely attached. Even if you really, really want to attach, you can't because you don't have the ability to do that. And so basic getting children through with basic needs is not enough. That connection comfort is really important. So you can actually have attachment issues with children when you don't provide them that comfort. So again, way ahead of their time, and a study that most of you know and will need to remember. I think I just said a ton of this stuff for you guys. So 4 phases of attachment, and you will need to know this, a 4-phase model for the development of infant-parent attachment. We've got indiscriminate attachment. They need that comfort and care, right? That's birth to 2 months. Phase 2, 2 to 7 months. They engage with family, prefer family, smile, look fearfully, or show signs of hesitation toward a stranger. This type of distress behavior is called stranger anxiety. A lot of you have heard of that. Phase 3 is 7 to 24 months, so almost 2. They're crawling, walking, creeping, probably walking, and they seek out the parent when distressed. The parent is a secure base for exploration, so they'll go kind of far away, but then be looking for mom. This is where that separation anxiety really begins because um, they know that the parent is leaving and they're not coming back for a while, and they want the parent to stay with them or return. 2 years onward, the child is able to separate now and understand that it's okay. They start to get through that. Um, Able to think about parents' needs, understand they have other responsibilities. That's what it 4 says. And then we've got Ainsworth. You remember the strained situation? I think she's coming up next here. Yeah, Ainsworth and the strained situation. Another study that's really important, and you need to know these studies. I would make sure that I memorized and remembered all of these studies for not only maybe the quiz, but also for the NCE and the CPCE. I remember all of these on mine. It's funny when you teach, it comes up as being referenced. So read over this on page 152. We know about the experiment with the strange situation, with a series of events with mother, child, stranger entering room, leaving room, etc. Make sure you know that. The observations came out with these different types of attachment styles in infants. Secure, um, insecure, and under insecure is avoidant and ambivalent. Um, Children with secure attachment cry and show other signs of distress when caregiver leaves. When the caregiver comes back, they come calm down and return to homeostasis. So this is all going to make sense from a brain perspective, right? Because they have the ability to do that. Like, oh, okay, mom's back, dad's back, whatever, I'm okay. It's okay. But those with this avoidant attachment, it's really strange. They seemed quite unaffected, whether their caregiver left or returned, showing little distress or enjoyment either way. It's very odd, right? I think if you guys saw that in a 1-year-old, you would find that odd, right? Like that's not normal. What's normal is more of what we know from secure. Like I don't know if any of you have ever volunteered in Sunday school, or some of you who have children. Usually, I used to volunteer a lot in the nursery or 1-year-old, and the babies were always we had to kind of trick them so mom or dad could leave because get them occupied with something else so that they wouldn't know they were leaving because they would start bawling crying, right? until we could usually comfort them for a while, and sometimes not. So, um, children who have ambivalent resistant attachment, they become distressed when the caregiver leaves, and even higher levels of distress when the caregiver is absent. However, when the caregiver returns, the child seeks comfort, but also resists it. So they're ambivalent, right? Unsure, which way do I go? And the fourth one that came out in 1990 is the disorganized attachment. That's the one that we know more, the disorganized, disoriented. That is, they look to the stranger for comfort instead of mom. They don't make eye contact with mom, and that's usually an indicator of trauma, right? Like you guys can answer me, right? All right. Attachment to moms and dads. Newborns are wired to recognize mom, and by 6 months show preference for caregiver. Depriving that toddler of close contact can have long-term psychological results. Attunement is the process toward building an attachment bond with the infant through repeated exchanges that show them that you know what they need. You're meeting their needs. You're responding appropriately. And remember earlier I talked about how we now know that you can go through the motions and feed your children, etc., and not bond with them. This is what it is. It's attunement. When a parent fails to understand an infant's signals, there's misattunement. So if the child is overstimulated, and there's been studies about this, and the mom keeps trying to hold them or keeps trying to play with them, and they need to rest or they need a break. They want to get put down. And the parent doesn't get that. That can lead to misattunement. So fathers obviously spend a lot more time with their kids now. And fathers who felt attached during pregnancy feel more attached to infants, but often that attachment for dads is a little bit more of a process, depending on what has happened in their life and how they feel, how their attachment is. We know that sibling relationships are really important. They are an indicator of later issues in life, depending on the closeness perceived by the siblings and their, if one is perceived to be more important than the other. And I can tell you from being a therapist as long as I have, that is always in the EMDR treatment plan. It's typically in there at some point. Um, Sometimes because they were the favorite and the guilt that they have from being the favorite and not doing more about to do anything about it, me having to help them understand, hey, you were a kid. You couldn't make your parents change and treat your siblings different. I've got one right now. Or the opposite. They weren't the favorite. They were, they say, the black sheep. And also this sibling rivalry, we joke around it a lot, but it's really, really important that siblings get along and love each other and respect each other because a whole host of problems occur as related to in your text when that is not occurring. And a predictor of tense relationships in siblings is often the relationship that you had with your siblings. If you're estranged and you don't have a good relationship with your siblings, then your children can mimic that. And Bowlby's referenced in family systems theory. We know that the generational is now we know the generational curse, as we used to say, is not really a curse. It's genetic environment that is causing that to continue and persist and down the family line. Grandparents play a huge role in kids' lives a lot of times. Census Bureau data says 7.5 million children lived with grandparents in 2010. That's 10% of all children in the U.S. Of the children, 4.9 million lived in the grandparents' home. There were 6.7 million grandparents with grandchildren under 18 living with them in 2009. 40% were responsible for all their basic needs, including, the cost of all of that. Parents increasing issues such as teen pregnancy, age, child abuse, neglect, mental physical illness, drug use, divorce, incarceration are prompting grandparents to become parents. They become the primary attachment figure when this occurs. It's very complicated though, because the primary relationship is to the parents and it becomes disrupted by the problems of the parents. Let's say, for instance, drug use. Children's reaction to parental separation involves moving through some stages of protest, despair, and detachment. During the protest stage, you're angry desperate for the missing parent, hopeful that they will return. As the separation continued, the children despair and become very hopeless, and eventually they detach and withdraw from interacting with their environment. It's a challenge for these custodial grandparents to help regain the trust and help them to have a secure base with them. Um, I saw this a lot in my work with drug court. It was really hard. They would come back and they would get sober and they would have been out of their kids' lives for years sometimes because of their drug use and being in and out of jail and or prison. And gosh, they would want that so badly to have that relationship restored. And they'd been with grandma, grandpa, or aunt, uncle, or someone for years. It was awful to watch. I mean, really, and it takes a lot of work on both. It can be done, but it takes a lot of work. So it was just it's sad to watch that. And for mine, that's a sad part of our job. But what else do I want to say about it? Very, very important research. I think you hear people say this a lot. If there's just one person that the child can rely on, then they can potentially be okay. So here it is in the professional non-parental caregiver role. The research indicates there are conditions that improve the chances of toddlers forming a secure bond with a caregiver who's not a primary source of attachment. Children between 6 and 30 months are likely to experience stress and anxiety in a daycare setting unless they have one professional caregiver who is reliably available to them. When children in this age range are separated from their parents and are simultaneously put in unfamiliar surroundings, their brains trigger an attachment-seeking response, which causes distress. If they have a caregiver respond, then that can be mediated. So there are cultural variations in attachment, right? Just what we talked about earlier. Um, Employment and daycare. So there's issues. So with daycare, we know that most of the time, if the child has their needs met and they are cared for in a loving environment, and you can tell they are not going to have an insecure attachment as long as the daycare providers are high quality. Also, your mothering and fathering after daycare, before daycare would be a factor in that as well. Temperament. Okay, we talked about temperament, and there are 9 categories of temperament. Temperament is basically your basic dispositions that in a person, and they're present really early in life. We talked about that, and I think the last chapter when I was discussing that. They found 9 categories of temperament. The study is old, 1956, but think of infant or toddler you know well, and think about these 9 categories of temperament. Activity level. Are they active or not? Regularity. How predictable or unpredictable are their sleep-wake cycles, their feeding patterns, going to the bathroom? Approach to withdrawal. How does the child respond to a new stimuli? Does the child have an approach sense, smiling, reaching? Or do they have an aversive response, the withdrawal? Do they push it away? Do they move away? Will they eat new food? Adaptability. How will they adapt to new situations? Threshold of responsiveness. How intense does the level of sensory, environmental, or social stimulation need to be in order for the child to make a response that you can observe? Intensity reaction. What's the energy level in response to the reaction to the stimulus? Their quality of mood. Are they pleasant, joyful, friendly, unpleasant, crying, unfriendly? Distractibility. How easily do they distract? Obviously, you know what that is. And attention span and persistence. How long does the child involve himself or herself in a certain activity or attention span? Can they continue a behavior? Can they take steps to complete something? There are 4 types of temperament: bold, timid, upbeat, and melancholy. So with these types of temperament, obviously the more melancholy, timid are at risk for issues later in life. Bold and upbeat could be a different risk, but very indicative, perhaps, of depression and things of that nature. Looking at MRI, functional MRI, sorry, I was going to read it, to assess brain's amygdala response to novel versus familiar face. So this is a study on page 159. Inhibited adults showed a significantly greater response to novel or new faces in both their right and left amygdalae compared to uninhibited adults. So the inhibited versus uninhibited adults. Um, Uninhibited will be the more bolder personality. Inhibited are the ones who are very scared and shy. So how do you look at temperament? How do you measure temperament? There is this infant behavior questionnaire, and it is something that is used. It's a parent questionnaire, and it defines temperament as 191 items. It's a parent report, like I said, 14 scales, and they look at 3 factors, and there they are: positive nationality or urgency, negative affectivity, and regulatory capacity or orienting. It may be biased, but studies show that parental reports of temperament have superior predictive validity when substantiated by other sources of data from other structured interviews. Also, other ways that we get data are by videotaped playroom observations and measures of physiological responses, heart rate, etc. Please look at case example 6.3 on mother's observations of children's temperament. Please read through Sienna, Owen, Elijah, Keegan, kind of get an idea of the different temperaments and how you can measure them. And if you are a counselor who specializes in children, these are things you're going to need to know and things you may be asking people to do. If you get a small child that's having issues, you may want to do this. And then if they have that inhibited response, you can remedy that by putting them in situations, not traumatizing them, but slowly putting them into, say, a preschool situation for a couple hours a day that reduce the symptoms of inhibition and anxiety in the study. Okay, temperament and child rearing. And as we're nearing the end of our lecture today, I think it's time for reflection for chapter 6. Isn't this fun? You get to listen and like wait for the little nugget. Like it's like a little treat kind of. You get to find it in the lecture. Yeah, I think I'm probably more excited than you are. But here we go. Case study response. I'm really enjoying reading all of your responses, and I very much appreciate the thought that you're putting into it. Let's talk about the Cotton family. Nancy and Paul Cotton are a professional couple who gave birth to their first child, Anna, after being married for 7.5 years. Nancy said, "We wanted a baby but couldn't decide when to have one. Finally, realizing we had no control, we can't predict the future, so we finally decided to go ahead and have a child as soon as possible. By the time we had Anna, I was 33, and our marriage and careers were established. We felt secure. Being an optimistic person, I guess I expected nirvana. Anna was difficult to deliver. Breastfeeding was a nightmare. Every time she nursed, it hurt. But I didn't want to miss the opportunity. I was so determined. I used a stopwatch to make sure Anna got enough milk, and I gave her a pacifier for recreation. When she was 5 weeks old, I went off to our summer house in Martha's Vineyard. Sounds rough, huh? I wondered if it was the right decision because there was less in the way of family and friends for support. But we worked things out together that summer. She was energetic from the first, and I was constantly sleep deprived, but we were so close. I found ways to make it easy for us. I used the swingomatic swingomatic so that I could eat a warm supper every once in a while and learn to give Anna pacifiers or bottles to soothe herself. Paul interjected. She was a miracle to me. She was fabulous, miraculous. She even looked like me. I did as much as Nancy did, not out of guilt, but because I couldn't keep my hands off of her. I took her with me everywhere when I was at work. At the Stop and Shop, all the ladies crowded around me. How do you do it? You're so good with her. I learned all about babies from her. I can bathe a kid faster than anyone in the world. Anna fit, said Nancy, from the time she was born. We pick her up and just go. As you can see, going is pretty important in our family, and Anna thrived on it. We were not the only ones who enjoyed her. My own mother thought she was fabulous. She took care of her part-time after I went back to work. I had a chance to see my mom be loving and kind, a good mother to Anna. It was reliving my own childhood, another kind of miracle. You see, I'd had a sister, Jenny, who had died. Anna gave my mother an opportunity to heal the pain of Jenny's death. This was true for me too. Describe Anna's temperament. So here's your question. Describe Anna's temperament. What problems might the Cotton family have faced if Anna had been a more passive, reserved, and inhibited child, which you just learned about? Evaluate the ways that Anna was expected to adapt to the Cotton family lifestyle. And give me some challenges that Nancy and Paul faced as new parents, and how did they cope? Okay, that's your reflection. I hope you got all that. So that brings us to this, is temperament. Goodness of fit. Is the parenting style a good fit for the kid? And that is right in line with the reflection that I just gave you for your forum prompt. Or is it poor? Is it dissonant? Is there dissonance when there's a mismatch between behavior of child and behavior of parent? Counselors can help work with that to help parents to increase healthy interactions. Very, very important. So you may get these people, because a lot of times I think in this class people wonder, why do I need to know this? And like, there's so much information in this class that's important. This is obviously something that could be remedied with parents learning coping for their own emotions and learning their child and learning what works for each child, because each child is different. I have a Helen and a Gray. They're very different. And those of you who have worked with children or have children or have siblings, we can all attest to this, right? And how we may have more of a similar temperament to mom or dad or whatever. So social development. And I think that this is almost it, guys. Great. Yay. Okay. The self system, developing the self, right? A newborn comes into the world with implicit awareness. They can demonstrate a sense of self by expressing perceptions and actions, but cannot use the symbolism meaning of words. So what does that mean? There's a proposal of 5 levels of awareness from birth to 5 years of that developing of the self system with that symbolism. Level 1 is self-awareness, self-world differentiation. The infant can differentiate someone else's finger versus their own finger. When someone, like the doctor, touches the baby on the cheek, that rooting response occurs, right? Those reflexes occur. By the end of 2 months, there's a level 2, which is called the situated self. They now sense their own body in relation to their environment. Starting to copy adults who stick out their tongue and pull it to left or right. So starting to do that copying and mapping their own space, that ability to know where they are in that space. 18 months, that explicit. So moving from implicit to more explicit self-awareness. They have self-recognition of their own body. And there's an experiment, the classic Rouge experiment, which has been replicated for 40 years, when they secretly place a dot of rouge on the 6 to 24-month-old infants and put them in front of a mirror. In similar studies, also using a yellow Post-it note is placed on the forehead. Unlike younger infants and toddlers, the now 18-month-old will touch the rouge or pull the sticker off of their face. So they're understanding that that's not a part of their face. Then they begin level 3, which is self-awareness and identification. That's where they're demonstrating who they are. Like, this is not a part of who I am. Get this off of me, right? By 20 to 24 months, the toddler starts to use pronouns. I, me, mine. You guys have all heard that, right? Concept of ownership starts to occur, showing self-perception, self-continuity as separate. Self-continuity is also called the extended self. The toddler is now aware of self existing as a continuous being outside of the present moment. All right, now we have effortful control and self-regulation, self-control. Really, really important concepts for toddlerhood, right? They don't have a lot of regulation and control, and they're learning that as they grow. And we know that develops over time where they're able to regulate self and control their ability to respond in certain situations. And social referencing. Social referencing is using the emotional expression of others to interpret unfamiliar events. Like looking, okay, I'm going to look at mom to see how they feel about this person. So if you're acting weird when someone comes in, they might freak out, right? But if you're kind of liking the person and you're kind of talking to them, they might warm up to you. You've seen this happen, right? With children. Oh, the old visual cliff experiment. Do you remember this? We're looking over to check with mom to see if we can crawl over the visual cliff. When we express joy and we don't look scared, they will willingly cross the cliff. So looking for referencing, social referencing, looking to those caregivers to see how they should respond. Oh, I had 3 spots left. Socializing emotions, same thing, right? Um, Cognitive structures in the brain are evaluating those emotional responses, like we talked about earlier, and learning to regulate emotional systems. We go back to the beginning and look at the blue slides and remember the thalamus and the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex. That's what this is. Helping a child develop effortful control assists in socializing a toddler's emotions, so helping them to stop in certain situations when they need to. That effortful control is the ability to inhibit a dominant response to perform a subdominant response, to detect errors and engage in planning. The example, and this is from a couple slides ago, but in our example, both children have been taught by their fathers to ask for a tissue when they feel something in their nose. Toddler 1 is not practicing effortful control because he's not able to inhibit the dominating response, the overwhelming urge to stick his finger up his nose. And toddler number 2 has the urge, but is able to ask for the tissue. Get it? And so, when you're constantly telling your child over and over, okay, ask for a tissue, get a tissue, get a tissue, helping them to develop that effortful control over time. It begins to emerge at the end of the toddler's first year and develops through early childhood. And the way that they formulate that self-regulation and being able to control stress and interpret emotions. And so, obviously, kids who have a more stable environment are going to be able to do that more effectively. Empathy. Everybody knows what that is, right? Something we're supposed to have as counselors. But the child who has that effort for control is able to attend to those thoughts and feelings without being distressed, and they're able to have more empathy. Play and social skills. Play simultaneously reflects the development stage of a child and provides stimulation to nurture the next phase of development. So there's 5 elements of play. Intrinsically motivated, freely chosen, pleasurable, non-literal, and actively engages the player. And there are 3 forms of play for infants: sensory motor, play with objects, and symbolic play. Infant parent play contributes to the sensory motor development. So if you play with your child more, they're going to be able to grow more in that area and set the stage for later development. And there are 3 types of social play. There's solitary play, onlooker play, and parallel play. So solitary play, they're playing alone. Onlooker, the child observes other children playing but does not participate. And then the parallel play is they're engaged in the same activity but playing separately. Beginning at age 2, toddlers enter that pre-operational period. That's the second stage in Piaget's theory of cognitive development. The period is characterized by a change in how children think, allowing them to engage in another type of play known as pretend play. This is the imaginative fantasy play that we all remember. 2-year-olds use pretend play alone and an interactive play with other children. Several benefits of these types of play. we know that the arrival of a newborn baby in a family changes everything, changes all the roles, right? The parents' roles, there may not be more than one parent, the grandparents, aunts and uncles, and also the siblings. Be aware of that as a therapist, because that even we know positive stressors can cause issues for people. And reflection questions. I already gave you a reflection, but just read over these. And we did it. We're done. 15 minutes. It's not too bad. Okay. Stop here and get on to 7.